Hi, Stephen Watson, mathematician from Glasgow, very interested in this topic, and that was an amazing overview for me of the issues ahead. I want to focus on the issue of not taking anything for granted. I read with some interest today an article by Professor Richard Murphy, Professor of International Political Economy from the University of London, who referred or spoke of the GERS figures in fairly disparaging ways. GERS figures play a critical role in some of the evaluations people make of the UK economy and also Scotland's economy. So he talked about the 7 bits of information and data that one needs to know. He listed them. I won't bore you with the detail. But then says that if one actually looks at the GERS report, he said the report is candid that the data is estimated. Indeed, 25 out of the 26 income figures are estimated, extrapolated from data from the UK as a whole. And he makes the claim that essentially what this really says is that it's not a solid picture that we have of the Scottish economy through GERS. So my question is, as we contemplate the impact of Brexit or not on Scotland and these bespoke deals, what role will GERS figures or should GERS figures play as we try to understand that?
Thanks, Steve. You're right. I mean, any set of accounts which are partly shadow accounts, as GERS are, which impute certain levels of spending across Scotland, some of which is reserve spending, is, you know, it leads you into territory which is quite complicated. So in terms of, if you're trying to evaluate the impact of a bespoke deal, I showed the figures for the WTO case for Scotland. And it's really interesting because if you were trying to implement Scotland's place in Europe, there would actually be a relative impact on the UK and Scotland because the UK under the differentiated deal would not be in the single market, the rest of the UK, Scotland would be. It would create some movement in economic activity between the rest of the UK and Scotland. For instance, if we have financial passporting in Scotland, but the rest of the UK doesn't, you might find some city firms setting up in Scotland. So these are dynamic effects that, you know, no static set of figures. If I asked Gary and his team and the Scottish government saying, use your NIGEM Scottish government GEM model to model all this, it's actually difficult because it's a change in the structure of the Scottish economy and the RUK economy. So these are difficult to model. You're absolutely right. And you would need to make assumptions about how much economic activity would, say, move to Scotland because of the differentiated effects. Now, some of them might move from the rest of the UK, but some of it might come from elsewhere in Europe. It's really complicated. And that's why, I mean, I would just urge you to, you know, I've presented you the evidence as it is, but I'm not pretending that these calculations are precise. They have error bands, of course, but the key message is that any sort of hard Brexit is costly. Any sort of solution that places us within the single market as opposed to outside is likely to help to alleviate that. How much? Difficult to say. If I had to do an economic evaluation of Scotland's place in Europe, you need to start making assumptions of how many jobs would move around to Scotland from elsewhere in the single market, from RUK. These are difficult issues. And another big assumption you need to make is what would happen to non-tariff barriers in terms of customs controls and things that, because although we would be in the single market, we would not be in the customs union. What other free trade deals would we do? You know, it's a very complicated picture. And so, you know, caveats are there, but, you know, I hope to have shown you at least this, that membership in the single market, a softer Brexit is better than a harder Brexit. That's all we can say, I think.